The billionaire father watched in disbelief as his black server took his disabled son's hand and led him in a dance step, and that single moment changed all three of their lives forever. Outside, New York's cold rain pounded against the windows, but inside the king's table, the gem of Manhattan, everything glowed with opulence and exacting elegance. Impeccably tailored Italian suits, dazzling evening gowns, hushed whispers shared only among the worthy. Here, every glance and gesture followed an unspoken rule. Privilege and power reigned supreme. David Carter sat at table 3, pressed against the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking a brilliantly lit Central Park. Before him stood crystal glasses of burgundy wine and artfully plated dishes that looked more like museum exhibits than dinner. Yet none of it tempted him. His chest tightened with tension. Beside him was his 10-year-old son, Ethan Carter. Hair tousled brown, eyes deep with unspoken hope, and bound at the knees by cold metal braces. The accident 2 years ago had stolen Ethan's ability to walk and torn the fragile peace from the Carter family. Since then, Ethan had retreated into himself, and David, used to controlling every outcome, found himself powerless against his son's pain. He had built invisible walls around them both, shielding Ethan from pitying stares and prying questions of high society onlookers. Tonight's dinner was the greatest challenge David had set for himself, and for Ethan. He'd replayed the decision to appear in public together countless times, not out of concern for gossip, but fear of how alien, curious eyes might wound Ethan all over again. Soft piano notes drifted through the room, stilling the hushed conversations. Every gesture felt practiced, every movement refined to an exacting standard. Ethan sat very still, watching each table, each passing server. Behind that silent exterior lay a fierce longing to belong, to feel part of a world that neither fine food nor his father's reassurances could fill. Then Jasmine Brown appeared at their table, the king's table's only black server among a sea of white uniforms. She moved with quiet grace, eyes cast downward, hands deftly clearing plates as though careful not to cross an invisible boundary. And yet, in that subtle kindness, Ethan saw something he couldn't ignore. Among dozens of distant adults, only Jasmine's gaze met his. As the music shifted to a gentle waltz, Ethan summoned his courage and spoke, voice trembling but determined. "Miss Jasmine, would you dance with me?" His question rippled through the room like a single drop in a still pond. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Silverware and glasses hovered in mid-air. A chorus of curious, uneasy, even disdainful looks turned toward table 3. David froze, unsure how to react. The manager and servers stopped in their tracks. Jasmine's eyes widened. She blinked in surprise. For an instant, all barriers of status, skin color, and upbringing collapsed, leaving only a small boy in braces with a heart braver than anyone's in the room. And in that hushed moment, at the king's table, where privilege ruled, fate began to turn. The silence in the room stretched taut for several heartbeats after Ethan's request, like a plucked string vibrating on. Quiet murmurs rippled through the diners, and the familiar faces of Manhattan's elite turned toward table 3, eyebrows arched, lips pressed in disapproval, as though they'd just witnessed an act of insolence. At the very center of that scrutiny, Mr. Stephen Thornton, the restaurant's manager, a tall, lean middle-aged man in a perfectly tailored gray suit and slicked-back hair, strode forward as if some instinct to preserve order had been violently threatened. Thornton's face was cold as steel, his gray eyes constantly scanning for the slightest breach of decorum. For over a decade, he'd enforced the king's table's strictest standards, believing that even the tiniest blemish on excellence could shatter the restaurant's reputation. To him, every guest embodied the entire hierarchy of privilege, and every staff member was a nameless cog, never permitted to stray from their role. He stopped beside table 3, lowering his voice just enough to carry to nearby tables without sounding rude. "Mr. Carter, please control your son. This is not a ballroom, and our staff is not here for entertainment." Thornton's words were a double-edged warning, a reminder to David of his place and a threat to Jasmine, that any step outside of the strict rules could cost her dearly. His voice clanged in David's mind like striking metal. David felt every gaze in the room bore into him, each one a tiny blade piercing the already fragile skin of a worried father. David Carter, accustomed to closing cold million-dollar deals, trembled under the invisible judgment of high society. His face flushed, lips clamped tight to hold back an outburst. In that instant, he felt smaller and more helpless than he had in the 2 years since Ethan's accident, locked away by pitying glances, bound by the ruthless rules he'd helped construct. He fought to sound calm, but his words betrayed him. "Ethan, please sit down. You're disturbing everyone." But Ethan remained still, his slender arm outstretched, his small hand reaching toward Jasmine. His eyes glistened, not merely begging for a dance, but yearning to touch a fragment of normalcy, to be part of this world, even for a fleeting moment. Thornton turned to Jasmine, his gaze a silent admonition. One misstep and her career, and the fragile dignity she'd fought to claim, would vanish. He didn't have to shout. A single steely glance was enough to let every server know that stepping out of line would cost them their livelihoods. Jasmine felt the razor-thin line under her feet. On one side lay the only position she'd secured after years of struggle and discrimination. On the other lay the honest plea of a fragile little boy, her lips pressed together, her palms slick with sweat. In that suspended moment, everything froze. The background hum faded, leaving only the pounding of her heart and the echo of every past rejection she'd endured as an invisible employee. Amid all that pressure, the watchful eyes of Thornton, the judgmental stares of the elite, David's mortification, and Ethan's burning hope, Jasmine knew that a single act could upend the harsh order of this place. And in that instant, she also understood some lines, once crossed by someone brave enough, change the world forever. The moment hung in the air like a drawn bowstring. Every eye laser-focused on Jasmine as Mr. Thornton's cold admonition still echoed in her ears. For years she'd skirted this line, but now, ever so quietly, she inhaled a steadying breath, her fear melting into resolve. Jasmine met Ethan's pleading gaze, then, in one deliberate, reverent motion, slipped off her apron and let it fall onto the table with a soft rustle that sounded like a bell breaking the king's table's unspoken code. She lifted her head, composed, and faced Thornton, David, and the sea of judgmental stares. "Sorry," she said softly. "I can't dance with my apron on." Bending low, she gently took Ethan's small hand in hers. Their eyes met, and the gratitude shining in his made every invisible barrier and every warning dissolve. With Jasmine guiding him, Ethan ventured out between the rows of tables that, for so many years, had only known pristine dinner jackets, never the hesitant, metal-braced steps of a child in braces. Each of Ethan's steps was slow, the braces scraping the floor with a raw, echoing screech. Jasmine didn't hurry him or pull him along. Instead, she matched her steps to his, each movement tender and patient. A ripple of nasty whispers rose from a nearby table. A woman in a mink stole, her crimson lips pursed, murmured, "She'll be fired tomorrow. Just watch." A gray-haired gentleman scoffed, Someone like her breaking rules. She clearly doesn't respect her place. Thornton's fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight, the last flash of his warning glance aimed at Jasmine. In the corner, a server hurriedly backed away from the eye of the storm, afraid to be implicated. David Carter stood frozen. He saw, in Jasmine's determined silhouette, a reflection of his late wife, Claire. Years ago, Claire had danced with Ethan right in their living room, giggling as his little feet, clumsy but eager, stepped on hers. "It's not perfection that makes magic, David," Claire had said. "It's connection, daring to let him lead." Now, in the city's most exclusive dining room, a black server risked her job so that a child might seize a moment of pure freedom. Under the soft glow of the chandelier, Jasmine and Ethan spun a tentative waltz, his face easing from tense to timidly proud, shame giving way to quiet joy. Though the piano continued, it felt as if only they existed in that orbit, every skeptical, judgmental gaze melting away before the smile blossoming on Ethan's lips. Across the room, Thornton halted, powerless. All his authority, even the power to decide someone's fate, couldn't stop this simple, powerful act of humanity. In his chest stirred a mix of anger and fear. If more Jasmines dared this, his ironclad rules might crumble without warning. 3 slow, courageous steps shattered the king's table's invisible wall. Each scrape of metal braces on the floor rang like a call to awaken. When the music finally ended, Jasmine bowed to Ethan with the grace of a lady to her honored partner. "Thank you for asking me. It was my privilege." She guided him back to his seat, leaving the entire room stunned into silence. But on Ethan's face shone a proud light, and in David's eyes awakened, then softened, a memory, a connection, and the longing to see his son lead, even if only for a single, fleeting moment. The moment Jasmine finished thanking Ethan, the restaurant remained cloaked in a heavy silence. Everything that had just unfolded tore aside the glittering facade that had long hidden the king's table's true nature. Yet, even as that moment lingered, the old order stirred, ready to reassert itself in its accustomed way. From behind the bar, Mr. Thornton emerged, his leather shoes clicking sharply on the polished wood floor. He planted himself before Jasmine, spine straight, and his voice rang out, calm but ice-cold, so every guest and staff member could hear, "Miss Jasmine Brown, your actions just now were entirely inappropriate under the King's Table's service standards and reputation. We will be issuing strict disciplinary measures." Each of Thornton's words cut like a razor. His disapproval of Jasmine went beyond her rule break. She had done what he himself had never dared, turned a human moment into reality at the heart of this temple of privilege. The other servers froze in place. A young waiter gently set down his tray, his hands shaking. An older waitress looked at Jasmine with a mix of pity and helplessness. Everyone knew how unforgiving these rules were, and that any breach would be made an example of. Among the diners, many wore their disapproval plainly. Some socialites pursed their lips, exchanging scornful whispers. Yet others, young entrepreneurs or first-time patrons suddenly aware of the fragility of these power norms, regarded Jasmine with silent admiration. They recognized in her something money couldn't buy, the courage to stand with the vulnerable, even at the risk of losing the only position she'd fought so hard to attain. Jasmine stood tall, her gaze never leaving Thornton's. She offered no apology, no defense. In that moment, the pride of someone long underestimated became an unbreakable shield against the tide of judgment. David Carter rose to his feet, rigid beneath the weight of so many stares. A memory of his late wife, Claire, flooded back. Not her gentleness, but the fierce look she wore whenever she saw injustice cloaked in rules. He realized how he'd let fear of society and obsession with a perfect image turn him into a bystander in his own son's life. After 3 slow, determined steps, Jasmine returned to their table and gave Ethan a formal bow, her voice still rich with respect. "Thank you for asking me. It's been my honor." Those words, spoken amid countless critical eyes, carried the weight of a declaration that human dignity transcends class, color, and codified rules. Jasmine turned away, shoulders trembling barely perceptibly, yet her stride remained unwavering. Whispers and scornful glances trailed her, as if determined to crush the black woman who dared to cross the line. Just as Jasmine took a few more steps, David's voice cut through the hush, steady and unflinching, heedless of unspoken etiquette. "Excuse me, ma'am, could you tell me your full name?" That simple question froze the room again. Thornton's brow furrowed in irritation. The diners all turned back. In that single moment, the power dynamic flipped. What had seemed a backstage incident now had a witness in renowned billionaire David Carter. The air grew thick with prejudice, curiosity, and something else. Hope. Jasmine paused and met David's gaze. After all she'd endured, the pressure, the humiliation, she still held her head high. And in that moment, hearing the name Jasmine Brown spoken in this bastion of privilege became a small yet potent symbol of a night the king's table would never forget. The moment the name Jasmine Brown rang out across the room, every sound seemed to fade, replaced by stunned, tense silence. Thornton's brow furrowed as he realized David Carter's unexpected intervention was slipping beyond his control. The restaurant's powerful patrons buzzed in disbelief. No one had expected the renowned billionaire to take the side of a black server who'd broken the rules. Jasmine stopped and faced David. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a heavy business card, the Carter Investments logo gleaming in gold, a symbol of an entire empire. Without another word, he placed the card in Jasmine's palm, his gaze both serious and slightly uncertain. "I'd like to see you tomorrow at 10, in my office at Carter Tower." His voice was calm, but carried more weight than any of Thornton's stern warnings. The entire room held its breath. Thornton's fists clenched, a mix of hostility and helplessness flashing in his eyes. In his gut, he was part afraid of David Carter's power, part furious that someone he'd dismissed as insignificant had become tonight's focal point. Jasmine accepted the card with a slight tremor in her fingers, but her eyes never wavered from David's, not with pleading, but with the quiet resolve of someone who knew that some chances come once, and that preserving one's dignity can mean taking great risks. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I'll be there on time." Her words rang clear, a silent promise before everyone. No one spoke again. Thornton turned abruptly, face as cold as ice, already envisioning the disciplinary reports he'd have to write and the explanations he'd owe his superiors. His worst fear: losing control of the order he'd fought to maintain. Jasmine slipped quietly out of the dining room, apron folded neatly in her hand. Yet, this time her shoulders stayed square. From a distant corner, an older waitress called softly, "Stay strong, Jasmine. Don't let anyone steal your pride." When only father and son remained at table 3, Ethan looked up at his dad, eyes bright with surprise and hope. "Dad, why did you do that?" David met his son's gaze. For the first time in 2 years, he saw not only the pain of a child living with a disability, but a fierce desire to shape his own destiny. In that instant, David realized how his own fears, of gossip, of maintaining a perfect image, had become another prison, turning him into a bystander in his son's life. He placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice low and warm, tinged with regret. "I thought it was time to really listen to you, Ethan." Beneath the crystal chandeliers, the two of them sat in peaceful silence. Elsewhere, Thornton summoned a server for hushed instructions, his face shadowed with anger. But the tide of change had already begun the moment a father chose to listen, and a server dared to stand tall in the heart of the storm. The next morning, while Manhattan still lay drowsy in the cold early mist, Carter Tower shone like a beacon, its glass facade reflecting sunlight onto the bustling streets of Wall Street. In front of that sleek, vast lobby, Jasmine Brown stood quietly in the plainest navy blue dress she owned, the one she'd scored at a deep discount clearance sale. She felt small amid the sea of tailored suits, luxury watches, and polished leather shoes. Every passing step seemed weighted with power. Jasmine took a deep breath, gripped her worn canvas tote, gathered her composure, and stepped inside, unfazed by the curious, skeptical glances trailing her from the lobby to the elevator. Her flats clicked against the cold marble floor like an intruder's footsteps. At the reception desk, she spoke softly, "Jasmine Brown. I have an appointment with Mr. David Carter." The young receptionist peered at her with a frosty stare, then tapped the intercom. "Ms. Winters will escort you." A few minutes later, Mrs. Linda Winters appeared. In her early 40s and always clad in a chic gray suit, Linda moved with effortless poise. Her sharply contoured features and cool, half-smile bespoke a woman who rarely tolerated surprises. She stopped before Jasmine, her gaze sweeping head to toe in thinly veiled disdain. "Oh, Jasmine Brown. My boss usually only calls up servers to this floor to let them go. I'm sure you know how that works." Her words were sarcastic, a slap without contact. For Linda, the world ran on a strict power hierarchy. Outsiders didn't belong. To her, Jasmine was merely a minor obstacle on the path to preserving both Linda's own status and David Carter's reputation in the financial world. But Jasmine remained calm. She returned Linda's appraisal with a slight, steady smile. "And where, may I ask, would you say my place is in this tower?" Linda paused, evidently thrown off by such a polite yet pointed reply. After a moment, she turned away without another word and motioned for Jasmine to follow her to the elevator. On the ride up to the 18th floor, the air felt thick. Linda didn't look back, but her tense posture and cautious distance said it all. Sometimes true power lies in remaining composed under pressure, and that unsettled Linda more than any plea she'd ever heard. When the elevator doors opened, the 18th floor corridor unfolded in splendor. Walnut floors, expensive abstract art, and streams of natural light. Office staff, mostly white men in crisp dress shirts, lifted their heads to watch Jasmine pass. In their eyes was both scrutiny and surprise, as though her presence shattered an unspoken order. Linda stopped before a small conference room. Her tone was icy. "Wait here. Mr. Carter will see you as soon as he's free." The door closed behind Jasmine. Alone in that unfamiliar space, she felt the weight of piled-up power dynamics keenly. Yet she stood tall, eyes fixed ahead. Linda Winters' mocking words and contemptuous glances only highlighted the dignity Jasmine had fought to protect. Dignity forged over years spent walking the narrow line between injustice and the yearning for recognition. In the hallway, Linda settled at her desk, her gaze still flicking to the closed door. A nameless discomfort stirred within her, the unsettling realization that, even at the pinnacle of power, you can't always control the new currents of change. The instant Jasmine's thank you to Ethan faded, the restaurant lay under a suffocating hush. Everything that had just happened ripped away the gilded veneer the king's table had worn for so long. But almost immediately, the old order stirred. determined to reassert itself. From behind the bar, Mr. Thornton strode into the center of the room, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood. He planted himself in front of Jasmine, back rigid, and raised his voice, cold and commanding, so every guest and staffer could hear. "Miss Jasmine Brown, your actions just now are a direct violation of the King's Table service standards and reputation. We will take severe disciplinary action." Each word cut like a blade. In his eyes burned not only anger at Jasmine's rule-breaking, but outrage that she dared to do what he never would, turn an act of compassion into undeniable reality in this temple of privilege. The staff froze in place. A young server gently set down his tray, hands trembling. An older waitress looked at Jasmine with equal parts pity and helplessness. Everyone knew how merciless the rules were here, and anyone who broke them was made an example. Among the diners, disapproval surfaced openly. Some socialites pursed their lips and exchanged scornful whispers. Yet across the room, other eyes watched Jasmine with muted admiration. Young executives and first-time patrons suddenly aware of how fragile these power structures really were. They recognized in her something money could never buy: the courage to stand with the vulnerable, even if it meant risking the only position she'd ever had. Jasmine squared her shoulders and held Thornton's gaze. She offered no apology, no defense. In that moment, the pride of someone long underestimated became her strongest shield against the storm of judgment. David Carter rose, stiff amid all those eyes. A memory of his late wife, Claire, flooded back. Not her kindness this time, but the fierce anger she showed whenever injustice hid behind rules. He realized he'd let fear of society and obsession with a perfect image turn him into a bystander in his own son's story. After 3 slow, resolute steps, Jasmine returned to the table and bowed to Ethan with the grace of a young gentleman, her voice clear and respectful. "Thank you for asking me. It's been an honor." Those words, spoken into a room full of judging eyes, carried the weight of a declaration. Human dignity transcends class, color, and protocol. Jasmine turned and walked away, shoulders trembling but steps unwavering. Whispers and stares trailed her like shadows, as if determined to crush the black woman who had dared to cross the line. Just as she'd crossed a few more paces, David's voice rang out, steady, unhesitating, unconcerned with unspoken etiquette. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I have your full name, please?" That simple question stunned the room once more. Thornton's brow furrowed in irritation. Diners spun back in their chairs. With that single inquiry, the balance of power shifted. This was no longer a mere incident for internal discipline, but the story of Jasmine Brown, a black server who stood for human decency, now witnessed by none other than billionaire David Carter. The air crackled with prejudice, curiosity, and, just beneath it all, a spark of hope. Jasmine paused, meeting David's gaze. Under the weight of pressure and humiliation, she still held her dignity intact. And in that moment, the name Jasmine Brown, uttered in this hall of power, became a small yet mighty symbol of a night the King's Table would never forget. The air in David Carter's office remained thick after Jasmine's refusal. From outside, Linda Winters watched every move, trying to guess how her boss would handle this act of defiance. David, accustomed to having every proposal accepted on the spot, remained motionless in stunned disbelief. In his eyes there was not only surprise, but a flicker of hurt, as though someone had just yanked his power from its pedestal. After declining his offer, Jasmine reached into her pocket and pulled out the simple business card for Freedom Moves, lightweight cardstock that stood in stark contrast to the heavy, gold-embossed cards of Carter Investments. She laid it on the gleaming walnut desk. If you truly want Ethan to go further, to find joy and freedom again, bring him to our community dance class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. First session is free. There, he won't be the billionaire's son. He won't be seen as a patient, and nobody will buy his progress with money or influence. There will only be rhythm, sharing, and trust. David leaned forward, as if to say something that might save the moment, but Jasmine was already on her feet. She offered no handshake, no bowed head, as if waiting for pity. Her gaze was steady, proud, unyielding, and quietly fierce. I believe Ethan will know when he's ready, and the choice should be his. Linda Winters watched Jasmine stride out of David's office, her surprise and irritation mingling on her face. No one had ever left David Carter's office standing so tall, and certainly not a black server from humble beginnings. Linda clutched her pen, a worry settling in her chest. If more Jasmines appeared, the old power structures really would be in danger. Inside, David sat frozen for a long moment, his hand brushing unconsciously over the Freedom Moves card on his desk. No one had ever dared refuse him, much less put him in the position of having to wait, or of being invited instead of calling the shots himself. All his years in business, he had always set the rules. But today, for the first time, the game had changed sides, and he found himself forced to listen, to step into a new world where money no longer bought control. David looked up at the city spread out below him, feeling both unsettled and exhilarated, a sensation he hadn't known since Ethan's accident. Deep down, he understood. It was time for his son, and for himself, to relearn how to choose freely and to engage with the things money can't buy. At the end of the 18th floor hallway, Jasmine stepped out of the elevator into a sea of expensive suits. Yet this time, each of her steps rang with confidence, reminding that tower of power that some values can't be coerced or purchased, but only earned when you dare to give others the choice. And with that, the real tide of change began to flow. A week had passed since the meeting at Carter Tower, and the Freedom Moves card still rested on David's desk beside stacks of million-dollar investment files and a jam-packed calendar. But Jasmine's words and Ethan's eyes that night kept returning to him, stirring something long buried beneath his armor of power and pride. On Tuesday afternoon, as Manhattan shifted from glamour to bustle, David Carter's Bentley rolled slowly toward the Bronx, a borough many in high society still considered beneath them. Ethan sat in the back seat, pressed against the window, his heart racing. He remembered the thrill of Jasmine guiding him in that first dance step, and the surge of freedom he'd felt under so many curious stares. Through the glass, the Freedom Moves Community Center appeared humble. Paint was faded, the sign peeling, but its bright, childlike colors still shone. Outside, a group of kids on crutches, walkers, and wheelchairs laughed and chattered. They couldn't have looked more different from the children Ethan had seen in his upscale rehab clinics. Here, everyone was free. Everyone was normal in their own way. By the entrance stood Zoe Brown, Jasmine's sister and co-founder of the center, her hair in a neat bun, wearing a simple t-shirt, arms folded as she watched. She glanced warily at the luxury Bentley, a mix of concern and pity in her voice. Someone like him won't actually come in, Jasmine. They just drop their kid off, slam the door, and won't dare touch this real world. Jasmine simply smiled. She knew better than anyone how hard it was for someone as powerful as David Carter to step outside his comfort zone, especially when doing so meant confronting his own insecurities and prejudices. Inside the car, David watched the scene unfold, hands tightening on the wheel. He felt out of place and uneasy. No security guards, no plush reception desk, No scripted greetings like in the fancy rehab centers he'd always taken Ethan to. Everything here was so genuine that he felt like an outsider peering in on simplicity. "I want to dance with the others," Ethan blurted out, determination bright in his eyes. David turned to his son and saw not fear or dependence, but a fierce will to choose for himself. In Ethan's gaze, David found a reflection of Claire, his late wife, who'd always believed in the liberating power of letting children lead. An internal battle raged. On one side, the fear of judgment from his peers if they knew David Carter was bringing his son to a low-class Bronx center. On the other, the call of fatherly love and the memory of Ethan's courageous eyes. All his life, he'd confidently steered every decision. But now, he was being led by his son. Outside, Zoe, Jasmine, and the other kids waited. Inside the Bentley, David sighed, then quietly opened his door and stepped out. He turned to Ethan and held out his hand. Ethan beamed, took his dad's hand, and, bracing himself on metal-clad legs, climbed out on his own. Arm in arm, father and son made their way to the center's entrance. Each of David's steps carried the weight of decades of societal prejudice and countless judging glances. Linda Winters had warned him, "Don't let this low-class stuff tarnish the Carter name." But today, David knew that if he let that fear rule him, he would lose something infinitely more precious: his son's trust and freedom. Zoe stood guardian at the door, still on edge. "May I help you, sir?" David paused, then spoke calmly, his voice softer than ever. "I've brought my son to dance class. I want to see for myself what it is about this place that makes Ethan so eager to come." Jasmine stepped forward, her gentle smile unwavering. "Here. Every child has the right to be themselves, Mr. Carter. I hope you find what you've never seen anywhere else." And there, in the golden Bronx afternoon light amidst children's laughter, David Carter felt himself truly stepping out of his comfort zone, ready for a new journey where power, prejudice, and prestige were no longer the only guides. Under Jasmine's guidance, David and Ethan stepped through the doors of the Freedom Moves Center. Inside, the atmosphere was the exact opposite of every high-end rehab facility David had ever known. The space was open and unpretentious. Scuffed wooden floors, walls plastered with bright, childlike posters in messy handwriting. "Every step is a victory. You set the rhythm. Here, everyone shines." The room pulsed with upbeat music, laughter, and, most strikingly, the sight of dozens of children using walkers, crutches, wheelchairs, and prosthetic limbs moving freely, dancing, spinning, expressing themselves in gloriously chaotic ways that defied any standard. Their uneven, improvised movements radiated a vitality that no expensive physical therapy clinic could match. Ethan fell silent in wonder. He looked around with wide, shining eyes, as if he'd discovered a new world where every limitation that once isolated him was now celebrated. By contrast, David Carter froze in the center of the room, eyebrows knitted in concern. His old logical mindset rebelled against the disorder. There was no structured schedule, no lab coats, no high-tech equipment. Every detail flew in the face of what he believed was correct. The chaos made him uneasy, igniting an urge to command and reorganize everything. Sensing this, Jasmine smiled and calmly approached him. "Here, every child has their own order, Mr. Carter. We believe in the power of choice. That's what makes each day different, and why Ethan can follow his own path." Zoe leaned close to David and whispered knowingly, "The first day is always tough, just for parents. Kids jump right in as long as the grown-ups step back." David hesitated, but the quiet confidence in these women's eyes silenced any objection. He watched Ethan wheel himself over to a group of new friends, introduce himself, and begin to immerse in this uncharted world. Heeled footsteps clicked behind him, and a dignified older woman with silver hair piled atop her head and a finely carved ebony cane approached. This was Dr. Brenda Mercer, a renowned neurorehabilitation specialist whose name David had read in countless medical journals. She appraised him with sharp eyes, one brow raised. "Mr. Carter, I clearly remember having 3 of our research proposals turned down by the Carter Foundation for lack of social applicability. Today feels different, doesn't it?" David stiffened, forcing calm into his voice. I don't recall the specific cases." Dr. Mercer offered a slight knowing smile, her eyes glinting with both irony and empathy. "From up high, people only see reports and numbers. Today, I invite you to look up, see how these children find their own rhythm and break every barrier." Jasmine stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. "I co-authored those very proposals, Mr. Carter. They were rejected not because they lacked merit, but because we weren't tied to any big conglomerates, weren't famous doctors, weren't insiders. Our ideas never even got a chance." At the door, Linda Winters watched warily, her face tight with unease. She felt a vague alarm. Carter's usual authority seemed to carry no weight here. David felt stunned. He realized he had spent years dismissing people and methods capable of transforming thousands of children's lives simply because he trusted only the formal barriers, the numbers, and the credentials on paper. Seeing Ethan smile among new friends, David wondered for the first time. Were all the standards he upheld just limits of his own making? Heart and mind clashed, old doubts fighting a fierce desire for Ethan's true growth. Yet, in the midst of that turmoil, a new feeling took hold, fragile, perhaps, but real: hope. The warm buzz in the Freedom Moves studio was shattered by the sudden slam of the door and a burst of camera flashes. A squad of reporters and cameramen rushed in, setting up cameras and preparing to film. Their jackets bore the logos of New York's major TV networks, and their notepads lay open, pens poised. Parents and volunteers jumped in surprise. The kids waved excitedly at the cameras. David Carter tensed instantly, his protective instinct flaring. For a moment, memories of media scrutiny and the fear that his son would be turned into some feel-good inspiration story overwhelmed him. He strode toward Jasmine, eyes cold and furious. "You arranged this? You're going to turn my son into a promotional stunt for your center?" Linda Winters, standing just outside, allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile, confident that the press would yank Carter back into the old rules of the game. But her expression quickly shifted when she saw Jasmine remain unshaken. Jasmine met David's glare with calm resolve. "Everything you see today happened naturally, Mr. Carter. The press visit is just part of our plan to share our research with the community. No child is forced to do anything." Ethan stepped forward on his own, and I simply followed his lead. Here, every child has the right to choose, and Ethan is choosing this moment. Just then, a cheer erupted from the little dance floor. The room fell silent as Ethan, standing in the circle of his peers, removed one of his leg braces, a feat even veteran therapists never expected him to attempt so soon. His movements were slow and slightly awkward, but his eyes burned with determination. Supporting himself briefly on a friend's shoulder, Ethan lifted his weakened leg, balanced on one foot, and reached a hand toward Jasmine as if to say, "Trust me." Under the glare of flashbulbs and dozens of astonished faces, he bit his lip, marshaled all his strength, and took that first imperfect but fiercely free step since his accident. Applause erupted throughout the room. Cameras panned across the cheering group of children. Dr. Brenda Mercer wiped away tears, and Zoe embraced Jasmine, whispering, "See? That's why you could never give up." David stood motionless amid the crowd. His eyes, once a well of restraint, reason, and authority, filled with tears. He tried to hold them back but couldn't. For the first time in 2 years, David Carter wept in public, not from pity or disappointment, but from a pure joy at seeing his son truly free and truly happy, something no amount of money or control could ever buy. Linda Winters, at the end of the hallway, froze. Before her, the power of the media had become nothing more than a backdrop for a small, genuine miracle that touched everyone's heart. Reporters flocked to interview Dr. Mercer, then Zoe, and finally Jasmine. In every answer, Jasmine emphasized, "I didn't lead them. I stood by them, trusted them, and waited for them to find their own path." That's what Freedom Moves is all about. Freedom not as a gift, but as the opportunity to define yourself. That day, David Carter was no longer seen as a mighty billionaire, but as a father trembling with pride. And Jasmine, the petite server, became the centerpiece of a silent revolution, turning a single dance step into a powerful emblem of each child's right to freedom, worth, and choice. Surrounded by the community's embrace and the echo of applause, David finally smiled. A quiet, relieved smile he hadn't felt in years. The applause, the camera flashes, and a barrage of reporters' questions crashed over David Carter the moment Ethan steadied himself among his friends. A young, enthusiastic but sharp-eyed reporter lunged forward. "Mr. Carter, what do you think of Freedom Move's approach? Will you let your son keep attending, or was this just a one-time experiment?" Another journalist jumped in, eager to mine the human interest angle. And that Wall Street billionaire exclusivity. "We understand the Carter Foundation declined to fund this program multiple times before. Now, seeing Ethan's progress firsthand, have you changed your mind?" Surrounded by the media, David felt himself teetering between two chasms. One path was the familiar retreat, close ranks, protect his image as the stoic gentleman the press and his career expected. The other was uncharted. Stop, show emotion, and embrace a new direction he wasn't sure he was ready for. Linda Winters watched from the edge of the room, eyes narrowing. She knew that if David wavered, the Carter name and reputation could never be the same. Tabloid headlines would mock his emotional decision overnight. But when David's gaze caught Ethan's radiant face, free of fear for the first time, glowing with pure confidence and joy, all his old certainties about power and control shattered. He drew in a measured breath, stepped forward, and looked directly into the cameras, his voice calm yet unmistakably resolute. I once turned down Freedom Moves. I believed that all progress and success could only be bought with perfect procedures and expensive specialists. Today, I was wrong. Ethan and these children have shown me the power of freedom and agency." He paused and glanced at Jasmine, standing quietly beside him, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Then, more firmly, "On behalf of the Carter Foundation, I pledge full funding for Freedom Moves for the next 5 years, and to help build a larger, more modern rehabilitation center, on one condition. Jasmine Brown and her team will retain full authority over the program's expertise, free from any manipulation or oversight by the Carter Organization or any other entity." The room erupted. Parents, volunteers, and children alike cheered and applauded. Dr. Brenda Mercer dabbed at her eyes, and Zoe wept with joy. Reporters swarmed Jasmine. astonished to see a petite black woman earn open, public trust from a Wall Street titan. Ethan sprinted to his father, threw his arms around him, and sobbed uncontrollably. In that embrace, every barrier and weight of the past 2 years seemed to melt away. In the hallway, Linda Winters stood stunned, a bitter shock in her eyes. All her schemes of power, control, and manipulation had suddenly shriveled beside this new current she could no longer command. Jasmine, voice trembling, approached and took both Ethan's and David's hands. "Thank you. Not just for the funding, but for the faith you've given us, and in your own son." David nodded, smiling genuinely for the first time into those dozens of camera lenses, the smile of a man of power choosing to stand for humanity, even at the cost of his career and image. That late afternoon in the Bronx, a new story was written, of humility's strength, faith's courage, and the magic that happens when power steps back to let love and freedom lead. From the moment David Carter announced that historic decision, the Bronx became a media hotspot. Exactly 3 months after that game-changing day, construction officially began on the new Freedom Moves Rehabilitation Center, on land once known only for tenements and ambulance sirens. Now, a gleaming project sign proclaims in bold letters, "Freedom Moves Rehabilitation Center, where every child leads their own journey." Every aspect of the center's design emerged from dozens of community consultations. Children, parents, teachers, and experts were all invited to share their dreams and ideas. The kids even chose the paint colors, wall murals, and flooring that would be safest for walkers and wheelchairs, and decided exactly where each mirror should hang so everyone could see themselves shine on the stage of their lives. This spirit of democracy transformed the project into a symbol of real social change. No more top-down mandates, no more judging by status or background. At the heart of it all, Jasmine Brown arrived each day with blueprints, notebooks, and that unwavering smile. She led the planning meetings, directed construction crews, and rolled up her sleeves to inspect every detail, from the wheelchair access ramps to the studio lighting gentle enough for those sensitive to glare. Jasmine's blend of firm leadership and genuine empathy earned the respect of builders, parents, and sponsors alike. Ethan Carter, the boy who'd spent 2 years hiding in the shadows, became Freedom Move's official junior ambassador. He proudly guided new visitors around the site, introduced future therapy zones, and encouraged the shyest children to try their first moves. His scars and braces peeked out beneath his workout pants, serving as a powerful symbol of overcoming shame, and inspiring both parents and kids. Even David Carter himself began to change. No longer merely the distant power broker on the top floor, he now signed up for doctor. Mercer and Jasmine's research meetings. In those early sessions, he sat quietly in a corner, listening intently to debates on innovative rehab methods. He pored over neuroscience journals and special education reports, handwriting notes, a task that his longtime executive assistant, Linda Winters, had always handled for him. Linda, once the impenetrable wall protecting the Carter legacy, found herself in those same meetings, brow furrowed. She realized her role as gatekeeper no longer fit this new world. Watching Jasmine solicit every child's input, she finally understood. Real power lies in listening and walking alongside others, not in enforcing outdated rules. The groundbreaking at the Freedom Moves site became far more than a charity ribbon cutting or a healthcare project. It was a landmark moment for the entire Bronx community. News outlets noted the wave of optimism. Children from across the city flocked to sign up for trial sessions. Parents eagerly volunteered design feedback. Medical schools, rehab centers, and human rights organizations reached out for research partnerships, the movement rippling through every social layer. Perhaps the most moving moment came when Ethan and two new friends jointly snipped the ceremonial ribbon, watched by Jasmine, David, Zoe, and Dr. Mercer. In everyone's eyes, both those accustomed to power and those once on the margins, there shone an unprecedented recognition and trust. It was clear. A new door had opened, not just for freedom moves, but for countless children and families seeking their own path to freedom. And on that ground, once defined by prejudice and barriers, a new community was reborn, rooted in empathy, guided by each child's lived experience, and driven by the shared power of choice. The opening ceremony for the new Freedom Moves Center had arrived, an event of huge significance not just for the Bronx, but for all of New York. From early morning, crowds poured in, parents clutching their children's hands, kids arriving on crutches, in wheelchairs, or with prosthetic legs, joined by volunteers, medical professionals, the press, and even politicians who'd long turned a blind eye to this part of the city. Under the early summer sun, the outdoor stage blazed with color. The banner, "Every Step Counts," proclaiming a manifesto for a new generation. Inside the center's grounds, hundreds of children moved confidently to upbeat music. Some danced on both legs, others spun in wheelchairs. Still others limped but beamed. Every gesture proof of the self-empowerment and perseverance this place fosters. In their midst, Ethan Carter stood out, his eyes shining, balancing on a single lightweight cane. His face bore no trace of past shame, only radiant pride, for himself and for every child daring to take the stage in their own lives. Behind the wings of the stage, among the bright flowers, balloons, and ribbons, David Carter watched silently. The man, once defined by power and ultimate decisions, now stood with reddened eyes, unable to hide his emotion. For the first time in his life, he realized a father's and a leader's greatest strength isn't controlling or directing every detail, but knowing when to step back and let others grow. When the music stopped, the MC invited parent representatives and sponsors forward to speak. Cameras flashed and applause thundered, but David declined the microphone. Instead, he quietly walked over to Jasmine, who at that moment was helping a little one take a first dance step just off stage, and placed a hand on her shoulder. He leaned close and said, voice thick with gratitude, "Thank you, Jasmine. Not only for this center, but for teaching me how to follow. Without you, I'd never have understood that sometimes a father or a leader must yield, must trust, and must let those you care about take the initiative." Jasmine smiled through tears, her eyes shining. She knew his words were more than an apology for past biases and mistakes. They marked a milestone in his growth, where power bows to faith and pride merges with love. Just then, a reporter approached for a quick question, curiosity and admiration in his eyes. "Mr. Carter, what's the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey with Freedom Moves, from your son and these children?" David took in the colorful walls, the laughing kids, the once powerless parents now brimming with hope. Then he looked at Ethan as if entrusting his answer to this new generation. His voice rang out, confident yet warm. "I used to believe a leader was the one who points the way, who controls everything and always knows best. Now I understand. A true leader dares to follow. When someone, whether a child, a humble teacher, or someone once considered invisible, shows you a better path. I'm grateful to have learned that lesson and proud to walk alongside all of you on this journey." Amid sustained applause and the shining eyes of Ethan, Jasmine, Zoe, Dr. Mercer, and even the once antagonistic Linda Winters, who stood quietly moved, the crowd recognized their own transformation. Freedom Moves had become more than a rehab center. It was a place where every act of growth, every act of forgiveness, every effort to transcend limits is honored. And there, before a cheering crowd, a father, once proud, once rigid, bowed his head in apology, stepped aside at exactly the right moment, and welcomed the real miracles that followed. Spring light floods New York's avenues this year, not just in the Bronx, but in every major city from Chicago and Houston to Los Angeles, thanks to one thing. The Freedom Moves method has officially spread, creating a nationwide rehabilitation network for children with disabilities. Headlines everywhere tell the story. TV shows feature experts and families who've experienced the program, and posters of Ethan Carter and Jasmine Brown, emblazoned with "Every Step Counts," now decorate hundreds of hospitals, schools, and community centers. Just 1 year after its grand opening, the Bronx Freedom Moves Center has become the model for a new generation of pediatric rehab projects. Thousands of children from across the country enroll. Dance classes and group therapy sessions have become hubs of confidence and joy, small miracles that traditional medicine can't deliver. Parents who once felt helpless now quietly wipe away tears as their kids take their first steps or bravely perform on stage before a cheering crowd. Jasmine Brown, once an anonymous server in high society eyes, has been honored with America's Top Innovation Award in Pediatric Rehabilitation. She's appeared on national television to share how Freedom Moves was built, her philosophy of stepping back so children can lead, and her belief that true worth lies not in background or status, but in the courage to empower others. Profiles celebrate her as the woman who opened the door to freedom for America's disabled children. Yet, Jasmine says her greatest reward is the radiant eyes and laughter she greets every day at the center. Ethan Carter, the boy once defined by metal braces and pitying glances, has become an inspirational role model for thousands of children with disabilities nationwide. He speaks at education forums about his recovery journey, encouraging others to step up, make their own choices, and live to their own rhythm. Though he sometimes still uses a cane, he's always the first to reach out to newcomers, urging them to try their first dance steps. Ethan has turned pain into strength, shame into motivation, and his personal journey into a source of community-wide hope. And David Carter, once the epitome of Wall Street's cold power, now is known as a thoughtful father who listens, admits mistakes publicly, and chooses to change for his son and for the community. He joins Jasmine at research meetings and personally helps raise funds to expand the Freedom Moves model. No longer chasing billion-dollar deals, he finds real value in every child's smile and every new milestone, things he never imagined half a lifetime ago. That same year, David, Jasmine, and Ethan appeared together on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Dance That Changed America." They became symbols of a new generation, where race, background, and privilege no longer divide, but recognition, empathy, and the power of a free step unite every corner of American society. Even Linda Winters, once the guardian of the old rules, now champions community rehabilitation projects. She speaks publicly about her own growth, the lesson of relinquishing control and respecting those small people once dismissed. Freedom Moves has continued to grow, attracting international experts for study and collaboration. Freedom Scholarships now support hundreds of underprivileged children nationwide, keeping dreams alive. At an annual festival, when Jasmine takes Ethan's hand for the opening dance and David cheers from the front row with a proud smile, they become three distinct notes melding into one liberating chord that resonates in thousands of hearts. Because their greatest legacy isn't a building, a program, or an award, it's the boundless power of connection, a community that steps back to let children lead, and an ever-expanding dream of freedom. That is the Free Step, a legacy that will never fade from the heart of America. If you found this story meaningful, please hit like, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of resilience, justice, and the human spirit. Thank you for being with us, and remember, even the smallest free step can change the world.